Why do we have this stand your ground? Well, basically, there was a duty to retreat, and the reason for that duty to retreat in the law was to try to de-escalate the violence that's out there. This is really notching it up, the right of a person to, in a sense, escalate the violence rather than to try to defuse the violence, and that is a concern. Also, in this stand your ground law, the individual who is not a police officer has
a majority of states
has more rights than a police officer would have.
Ken, how do you respond to that? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, a majority of states had no duty to retreat. I mean, that was the majority rule that the Supreme Court unanimously endorsed in 1895 in Beard versus U.S. by Justice Harlan, who was a great advocate of racial equality for African Americans. He famously dissented from the separate but equal holding in Plessy v. Ferguson. In 1921, in Brown versus U.S., Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, another great progressive justice, endorsed the concept of stand your ground, so it's deeply rooted in American law, and a majority of the states of the country had it. These new statutory changes in stand your ground were targeting this relatively few number of states that impose this wrong-headed duty that a person under attack, whether they're a woman, whether they're a racial minority, that they would then have to turn their back on their attacker and expose themselves to greater danger. And because of that, I think all Americans should applaud the National Rifle Association advocating this common sense measure that just restored the self-defense rights that a majority of Americans enjoyed under the majority rule that most states followed all along.
Well, Dr. Drew, a lot of the Brady Group, for example, calls it a shoot first law. In other words, shoot first, ask questions afterwards.
So Brady,
is that what we want?
So the Brady
but that's
organization is against the
absolutely
stand your
absurd.
ground.
That is not at all in the law.
Well,
you know, Mayor Mike Bloomberg in New York City said the exact same thing.
The National District Attorneys Association has issued statements about the fact that this really allows a sweeping immunity for certain individuals. I mean, even if there's going to be a hearing, Dr. Drew, where the judge gets to decide if George Zimmerman can assert this stand your ground law in defense.
The Arthur hearing, what do they call that?
If he can't, yes, and if he can, then the prosecution still has a right to appeal.
So he's trying to get immunity at that point.
Yes, and
if so,
under
the stand your ground
there'll be no trial.
Right.
There will be no trial
if the judge grants that.
If the judge grants that, and so in other words, if George Zimmerman wins, the prosecution
can
appeal.
But all the law does is
if it's upheld on appeal,
one at a time, guys.
But
Ken, I have something for you. But Ken, hold on a second. Now I'm talking.
Sure,
I love the history
please.
lesson. I really did. But you keep slipping past this issue that gets my attention, which is that African Americans are 5 times more likely to be affected by this law than Caucasian. What do we do with that?
Well, I think that that's certainly a challenge. As I said, my co-author, who is mayor of Cincinnati and is African American, is in a big debate with Mayor Mike Bloomberg on Huffington Post, debating exactly that issue. The reality is that racial minorities are at greater risk of being victims of violence. And so they even have a greater stake in laws being clear that they have the right to defend themselves just like any other American.
But, you know, he's going to have to show, George Zimmerman's going to have to show that he had a reasonable belief. Not just any belief, but a belief
I agree with that completely, Gloria.
That it was necessary.
I got it. I'll take care of you, Gloria. Go ahead.
He has to have a reasonable belief, Dr. Drew, that it was necessary, not just desirable, but necessary to use that deadly force in order to prevent death to himself or serious bodily injury or the commission of some forcible felony against himself. So the question is was it necessary, and was it a reasonable belief?
Just out of curiosity, what if he said, because he only shot once. Usually when people are using deadly force, they'll shoot a couple times, or that's what my understanding is, when people feel they're threatened. What if he said, I just took a random shot and it ended up killing this kid I didn't mean to? What happens to the situation then?
I don't know what he's going to say in reference to that, because, again, it is fact-specific. We're going to have to know what the facts are. We'll have to see what his defense is. But it's so broad that even if he prevails at this hearing and then prevails on appeal, that even Trayvon Martin's parents are not even going to be able to sue him civilly. You've seen in a lot of criminal cases, sometimes the defendant is acquitted, but then the parents can still sue in a
Yes.
civil case.
Yes.
And this is
He has
kind of what
immunity.
happened in the O.J. Simpson case. But he'll have complete immunity, even from a civil case by the parents.
Daryl, I want to go to you. You heard what Ken was saying. Can you put a little button on this for us? How do we understand all this? So let's step away from George Zimmerman for a second and just back to the fact that this seems to disproportionately affect African Americans. What do we do with that?
Well, I think we have a problem here, because when you have the situation that Trayvon found himself in, it was very convenient for Mr. Zimmerman to claim this defense and to set his facts up so that he could defend himself using this statute. However, there's a real important point I think we have to go back to. I think we have ample facts here that show that Mr. Zimmerman provoked the situation. He trailed Trayvon. He said he was suspicious. Right. He said that he looked like he was up to something. I mean, he called him either a punk or a coon. All of those things show that he was following Trayvon. He got out of his vehicle. He walked beside the townhouse that was there, down into the alleyway. I mean, all of those things clearly show that he was the person that provoked this situation. So we don't really get into what happened in the fight itself, because once all these facts come out that show the provocation, and the witnesses who saw the incident and who on the 911 tapes make it very clear. It's important because every time you hear anyone who wants to side with Zimmerman, they go straight to the altercation. There are plenty of other facts before we ever hear a word from Zimmerman about what happened leading up to that. So, yeah, I'm sure he's going to say some things that are very self-serving to him, but there are plenty of other facts out there as well.
Well, and Dr. Drew,
right, guys,
please let me clarify that
Ken,
I'm not
10
defending
seconds,
George
Ken.
Zimmerman.
10 seconds, buddy.
Absolutely. I don't know. George Zimmerman may be guilty of a crime, and if he is, then I hope he's punished, and I hope the Trayvon Martin family gets justice.